Good
Neha,
evening,
you can mute yourself.
Radhika.
Yes, I'm here, Neha. Good evening. I'm here.
Thank you for making it. Thank you so much.
Good evening, Dr. Bhandari.
Good evening, Dr. Gupta.
I hope all good.
Yes, all good. Thank you. I'm back here and with you now. Thank you.
Right.
Good
Welcome, Dr.
morning, Dr.
Melina.
Melina.
Ma'am, Dr. Radhika Bhandari is here. She's going to be starting.
Yeah. Should we start then?
Yes,
Okay,
please.
wonderful. Dear school leaders and teachers, good afternoon and good evening. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this third day and third session of the Transformational Training Week. My name is Radhika Bhandari, and I'm the president and CEO of the IC3 Institute, which I lead from New York. And you're seeing me for the third time today, so welcome back to some of you, and welcome to others who are joining for the first time. And I do want to thank CBSE for giving the Institute the opportunity to help shape this week, which we truly hope will be valuable in your critical role as educators. Before we begin our session today, I do want to share some logistical items and also how today's session will flow. First, please remember, as you've already been seeing on the screen, to keep your mic muted and your camera turned off. And please also be careful not to press the screen sharing button, because this is very disruptive to the speakers when they're presenting. We will also take questions at the end of the session, but encourage you to type your questions both in the Google chat, Google Meet chat for those of you who are with us here in Google, but also for those who are watching the live stream to please add your questions on the blog page, and I will draw upon questions from both locations and pose them to our speakers. So now let's move to the part of the program that we're actually here for, and we've been waiting for. And our special topic for today's session is continuous professional development for educators, which is all of you. So I think this topic is a particularly critical one. With the ever-evolving landscape of secondary and post-secondary education and future careers, it's critical for educators to expand and grow their professional knowledge and skills to serve students as effectively as possible. Effective professional development for educators is a core part of securing effective teaching and has a direct impact on student achievement and outcomes. To address this topic, we have two wonderful speakers offering two very different perspectives. A perspective from the UK and a more global perspective. I will introduce both speakers together. The first will be Sir Mark Grundy, who is the CEO of Shirland Collegiate Academy Trust in the UK. He has been associated with Shirland Collegiate Academy for over 20 years, starting as headmaster in 1997 and becoming the trust CEO in 2016. Sherland has a national reputation for innovation around curriculum design and its use of education technology, and has a long-standing relationship with Microsoft. And we'll actually be hearing more about the role of technology today. Sir Mark was knighted in 2006 for his services to education and technology in the UK, and his emphasis on excellence is something that he drives through all schools within the trust to create exceptional outcomes for all students. Our second speaker will be Dr. Ezekiel Molina, who is an economist with the World Bank based out of the US and leads its teaching initiatives. He's the team leader for the SABRE Teachers Program and Teach Classroom Observation Tool within the Global Knowledge and Innovation Unit of the Education Global Practice. And he will be sharing more about this today. He works on measuring the quality of education service delivery and improving teachers' classroom practices. In this capacity, he provides support to projects in Africa, Latin America, and South Asia. Previously, he worked with the Africa Human Development Economic Unit of the Poverty Global Practice and was a core team member of the World Development Report 2017 on governance and the law. So with that, and with those introductions, over to you, Sir Mark, to get us started.
Thank you, Rajika. So let's see if I can get to my screen. So, no. I'm hoping that you can all see my screen.
Yes, Mark, we see it loading, and yes, we see it now. It's right there.
Excellent. So good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Here in the UK, it's sunny for the first time in 2 weeks, which is a huge advantage over what we've had over the last couple of weeks. We've had one of the wettest summers for ages. So, but hopefully your weather's different. Obviously, it's interesting across the world at the moment. COVID-19 is still having a significant effect on our communities. But I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give you a view of my schools and how we work, and actually how professional development has changed in my schools over a period of time. So this is my main school. So as Rajika said earlier, I came here in 1997 to be the head of Shireland. Shireland's a large inner city school, right in the middle of England, by very close to the city of Birmingham. At the moment, just over 1,300 young people, 11 to 18, but it will grow to around about 1,600 youngsters, which makes it a large secondary school for England. But my school and my schools all serve quite deprived communities. And those indicators in the middle, which I'm sure mean very little to anybody other than English school staff and heads, they illustrate how deprived the community economically is. Over half of our youngsters have free school meals. The national average is about 18%. There are 62 languages spoken in Shireland. There is a significant Sikh, Pakistani Muslim, Bangladeshi Muslim, Somali Muslim, Afghani Muslim community, as well as a number of African Caribbean area communities and Eastern European communities. We have this amazing thing called Ofsted, and my school, so Shireland, has been judged for its last 3 inspections as outstanding, which makes us unusual. Excuse me. Out of the almost 4,000 secondaries that there are in England, probably less than 5% are outstanding and have been consistently outstanding. So Shireland's a large school for us. Having travelled to other countries, I know it isn't a large school for other countries, but in England it is. So Shireland then formed a trust. So one of the unusual things about the English education system is a decision was made 15 years ago that we would take away local control of schools and actually give it to school leaders and groups of schools. So we have, my main school is an academy. Schools in England that are allowed to do this are called academies. Probably about 50% of the schools in England are now they're now academies, and that means that they actually are independent state schools. So we work for central government, but we don't report to the local authority or a regional director or a state or in a sort of the subunits that you have in lots of parts of the country. So in my trust, there are 3 secondary schools open at the moment. There are 3 primary schools open at the moment. 2 more primary schools will join our trust in January, and then we're building 3 more schools. So we're quite a large trust for where we are in England. We will look after somewhere in the region of about 8,000 youngsters, but I absolutely understand in relation to the scale of India that probably doesn't sound very many. What does my trust stand for? Well, it stands for this. Actually, it's all about how can we innovate, how can we inspire, and how can we actually get people to work together. And one of the reasons that the innovation part particularly has been necessary is because we support such a challenging community and challenged community, I can't rely on the things that some families can rely on. So we've had to create structures where, and quite often using technology, where we can make up for the fact that actually sometimes at home our families can't support their youngsters as much as they would like to. And there's something that we do that is slightly different, is that we have a mentality where whatever we can do to remove the pressures from staff, and however we can train staff, and particularly in a process management way, we'll do that with the whole intention of us doing as much of the heavy lifting as possible. If you went back 10 or 15 years in England, it was a very top-down structure. It was very much led by the central national curriculum. Our leadership programs in terms of our senior leaders were very much about accountability, but not necessarily about enabling and actually protecting staff and inspiring youngsters to take risks. So what we do as a trust is we do as much of the heavy lifting as we possibly can. How do we do that? Well, as you heard in the introduction, one of the things that we do that is quite unusual is we use technology, and we are one of the 20-odd Microsoft flagship schools across the world. We featured in an amazing film in 2019 where Microsoft came to Mumbai and filmed there. They filmed in Los Angeles, and they came to Smethwick, where my school is based, and they filmed in Shireland. And the reason that they visited those 3 schools and school districts was that what we all had in common was this, which is that we'd actually created an architecture for improvement based on Office 365. So wherever I can remove the necessity for someone to have to do it, and therefore for us to have to wait on for someone to do it, and actually use Microsoft's technologies to do it for me, that's what we've done. And what you can see there are a number of the things, a few of which I'll show you as we go through this presentation. So why Microsoft? You can do similar things with Apple technology. You can do similar things with Google technology. For us, why Microsoft? Because it allows me to do the heavy lifting. It allows me to do it in school and across schools. It allows me to do it into the home. It allows our youngsters to take whatever they do in school seamlessly back into their home or into community venue. So I can operate a school improvement framework on a multi-leveled or a multi-layered, as my onion shows here, structure. This is our staff portal. So when I went to Shireland a long time ago, so in 1997, I became a secondary head. The normal day was there'd be a briefing. Everyone would gather together. Youngsters would come into school. We'd then go and meet the youngsters, and we'd start the lessons. And very quickly, I removed that. We introduced this structure initially in SharePoint and now using Office 365, where we don't have a briefing in the morning. We don't need it. The staff portal actually delivers all the messages, all the resources, all the key information to all of my staff, and there's a similar one for students every day of the week. So it means our staff are always where they're supposed to be, which is their classrooms waiting to receive youngsters. As much as I flattered myself when I first became a head that actually they all wanted to come and to listen to me in a staff room or in a hall somewhere, actually I'm not sure it's true. I think actually what they'd prefer to do is to be with the youngsters, and actually I'd prefer them to be with the youngsters. Governance is an issue for us. So as we've grown as a group of schools, what I wanted was something whereby we could work in a way that my governors, my governing bodies, our trustees could actually have access to information just as quickly as the students could and just as quickly as staff could. So again, one of the things that we've done is we've built this model of distributing information to key people and then asking them to look at it ahead of meetings, because we couldn't see why you would possibly develop middle leaders and senior leaders where they felt they had to prepare massive reports and then talk to people about them if there was a way to actually prepare something that was much more forensic and then send it to key people who were the decision makers and we were accountable to, and then have a dialogue about it, because it just felt like a much better use of time. It's also important to say, I'm going to come on to something called flip learning in a little while. So Shireland has been one of the top flipped learning schools in the country, if not the world, over the last sort of 10 years. We've held a couple of European conferences and we're regularly asked to present across the world in terms of how we've changed our learning methodology. And in relation to CPD, that flipped change has probably been the thing that I think has made greatest difference to our schools and other schools that we've supported. I will come back to that. Data is really important. Getting it together is not. So again, what we've done is we've harnessed Microsoft technologies to create a data portal, a data structure, where all the key information across our schools are pulled together, are processed centrally without someone having to do it, and then the key information is given to staff in an exception report. And again, in terms of CPD, we've run over the last sort of 5 or 6 years a whole program of how we develop this different mindset to information about student performance, so that actually people don't feel it should be something that's burdensome. They think it's something that, because of their natural way of assessing, actually will be provided for them. It's back to that concept of heavy lifting again. So what you really want is a window. What we've used technology as is a window into the youngsters' learning, into their performance, into how staff work together, for governors. And one of the things that we've used for 4 or 5 years now is Power BI. So this is a data analytics tool. So this is an overview of one of my primary schools, showing exactly how all the children in a particular class are doing in a particular time period. So staff assess as naturally as possible, and what we get is an immediate overview of where there are gaps, where there are issues. So actually what we can do is we can go and address those issues and not teach to the middle, but actually teach the specific deficiency of either a group of youngsters or an individual youngster. And we've developed touchscreen assessment mechanisms. So this is just a screen grab from something that we've produced, where our staff, instead of having to enter data, actually just touch the screen and will enter their assessment judgments for youngsters directly by doing that. And all of my staff across all of our primaries and secondaries all have a tablet and all will do their assessment in this way. What I actually wanted was that bigger picture. So I wanted to be able to show that here are 3,500 youngsters. Where are they missing things? Where are their gaps? Where do we need to intervene? So again, in terms of a CPD change, we've worked with all of our staff and with other schools and the trusts that we've been supporting over the last few years to actually get them to think about exception reporting, but then intervening for where those gaps are, but using technology to actually allow them to do that. So we use technology well, but actually what we'd like to think is that we use it in a mundanely clever way. We don't want the technology to be scary. We don't want there to be a mystique around the technology. We want it to be ever so easy to use. So all classrooms-based staff through to middle leaders who run departments or faculties or particular phases in primary schools, or my senior staff, my heads of school, my vice principals, all can actually use this really easily. One of the things we've also done is, in the early years of secondary, we made a decision that actually teaching in the traditional way of separate subjects wasn't something that we actually felt really supported the youngsters. So, and we've done this for over 12 years, but actually nationally our inspection structure, Ofsted, 2 or 3 years ago, wrote a report to say that they felt in English schools we were not really creating a diet that enabled youngsters to excel. We were creating a diet that actually made youngsters go through a series of separate subjects with very little joined together, very little sort of synergy, which was in stark contrast to what they did in primary school, where actually they worked in a much more integrated thematic way. So we decided all those years ago we would change something, train the staff, so actually have a very clear bridging mechanism between primary and secondary, and created this thing that we call Literacy for Life, where in the first 3 years of our secondary schools, all of our secondary schools, we actually effectively operate, I suppose, somewhat like a primary model, where there is a single teacher for a significant number of hours, but then there will be some subject specialists who come and do things whereby either you need specialist equipment or a specialist environment. And L4L, Literacy for Life, is delivered thematically, and those are the themes here that we use. And there are some amazing themes. And we've had this inspected 3 times now by Her Majesty's inspectors in England. And each time it's been judged to be outstanding. And then in the back of it, what we've developed is a competency framework. So these are very knowledge-rich themes, but then they are competency assessed. And again, in terms of CPD and areas where we've supported not only schools in England, but also schools in other parts of the world. So we've hosted the Singaporean education ministers, we've hosted City of Helsinki, all of their head teachers. We've hosted the Hungarian education, the Estonian education ministers, because one of the things that we've done is create a competency framework and then embedded it in a knowledge-rich form of delivery. And in terms of 21st century skills, we were determined that our learners will be as well equipped as possible to actually to prosper in this flat world that we live in now. So L4L is delivered in a flipped way. So all the resources are pre-prepared and sit online. They're all then delivered, they're made available to our youngsters, and our youngsters are then asked to go and do a series of pieces of work before they come into school. And it's proved incredibly successful. It's revolutionized our levels of achievement. It's changed the way my staff teach. It's changed the way our staff think. And it's changed the way actually we get into homes. And if there's anything that actually has prepared us as well as it could for COVID-19, this has, because our young people are used to continuing their learning when they go home. And there would have been a time when we would have said, well, you can't do this unless you've got a very rich community and they've all got home computers and their parents can all lavish all sorts of resources on them. But it's not true, because actually in the Office 365 environment, a smartphone works incredibly well. If the youngsters are lucky enough to have a device or a games console, that's what our youngsters access their learning on, and they do it seamlessly. They flit between something that might be social to something that will be academic in a way that we couldn't previously do. All in this flipped way. It's out there, I've got it, I can work on it now. And we've trained our staff accordingly. It's delivered in this thematic way. These are all the sort of front ends of the interfaces that my team have created. Because we've been doing this for almost 20 years, we're quite skilled at actually developing learning environments where youngsters can go onto them, and it's self-evident what they've got to do. So in terms of training my staff, our staff, their pedagogical toolkit has changed dramatically, because it's much more about skill development as well as making sure knowledge is delivered. It's about context. It's about enabling at home. It's about getting families to work with their youngsters to make sure that I don't just get the 6 hours that I get them in school for the day. I actually get another period of time at home that adds to that, but I also get that family engagement. We've then worked with Britannica. So, and I know that Karthik, their CEO, spoke a couple of days ago in relation to this event. And when Karthik told me about this, I am so proud, to be honest, to be asked to do this. Working with Britannica was tremendous, because Britannica have got some amazing resource. What we were able to do with Britannica is to take that and to take their Launchpack way of working and actually put together bags of resources that we could then deliver to youngsters in our flipped way. So what we've done is we've reordered, I suppose, the amazing resources that Britannica already had. we've interspersed them with some learning activities. And on my screen, you'll be able to see there's Indonesian biodiversity, there's a coral reef unit, but there's one that says resource route. And if this was a live Britannica launch packs, what you'd be able to do is go to that, and actually our staff have written the way that you should actually do the supporting activities in relation to coral reefs to make sure that it maximizes your learning. Again, same context, can be done in school, can be done at home, can be done in this flipped way. And we've also then added a learning journey in, student activities. And because you can map all this and track all this, you can remove the assessment burden from teachers, from school staff, which is always one of our things. Go back to the beginning of this. If we can do the heavy lifting, we want to do the heavy lifting. And then just to give a more rounded view of how we work, we also then push all of our youngsters to do any national competition. Even though quite often our schools in England will work locally, we don't. We work nationally because we think, well, what we actually want our youngsters to do is to think that they can get to the highest point, not to some achievable point. So COVID, just for 5 minutes, let me just finish with how we've dealt with the COVID disaster. COVID-19 has been tragic across the world. I think one of the disappointing things for a number of schools in England is if you went back 10 years, there were more schools like Shireland, and today there are fewer. And part of that is because our government missed this opportunity, missed an amazing opportunity to actually get there to be an architecture across their schools where if you needed to work differently, you could. But this was a message I gave to my staff. So what we've done in England is we've actually continued to support all the key workers from hospitals and other public services in our schools, and we brought a whole raft of them into the schools at Shireland. We then ran activities at home. So basically, we taught 4 hours a day, beamed into lessons using Microsoft Teams, where we were getting anywhere between 96%, well, everything above 3/4 of full attendance online and full participation from our youngsters as we deliver these lessons to them. We map it. So this is again a view, this is Power BI. So real time while we're doing this, it's all mapped and then reported back to our staff. So you can tell that in a particular year group, they're not doing as many of the activities here, or there's this particular year group here are doing amazingly well. We, in a 2-week period, just before Easter, we delivered almost 800 live lessons using Teams. And by that, I actually mean a real live lesson where there would be 50, 60 youngsters with 1 member of staff or 2 members of staff interacting with them, having new content delivered to them, so that actually the learning process could continue, even though we were obviously in lockdown in England. In the period of about 10 weeks, we had just under 500,000 engagements with the students, whereby they uploaded activities, they worked live, they used, there is something called Sentry, which is an AI-based revision system, which a lot of our youngsters have used. Britannica Launchpad has worked incredibly well with our youngsters, where they've continued to do their public examination work, despite the fact that actually they've been stuck at home. How do we do it? Again, in the Office 365 environment, we've created these hub and class sites, which are basically your virtual classroom, where youngsters can work with them. But we haven't done this because of COVID. This is how we work. Because then if someone's absent, someone's ill, someone moves, there are specific things like we need to target, we can get into homes, we can get into community centres, and we can do it seamlessly. And these are some of the class site structures that we've used with our youngsters. These are some of the activities that during COVID, we actually have done with our youngsters to continue their learning. It was really important that actually there wasn't a dip in our levels of achievement. So we have done all sorts of things. I thought you might be interested to see this. One of the unusual things that we have across all of our schools is an immersive room. So about 7 or 8 years ago, we decided that if we couldn't take the youngsters to the Taj Mahal, or we couldn't take them to the Great Wall of China, or we couldn't take them back in time to Pompeii, why didn't we create an environment where we could actually take the youngsters into it, and we could actually give them a whole visual, auditory quite often quite a kinesthetic experience. So actually they could feel what it was like to be. So the one on the top right hand corner is actually some work that we've worked with another with a software company to create a timescape of Pompeii as the eruption starts. So youngsters go in. This room accommodates about 70 or 80 youngsters. It's got scent technology, it's got tremendous sound, so we actually can take them in and make them feel what it's like to be in Pompeii at the moment that Vesuvius is going to erupt. Why do we do it? We do it because we really want to push them in terms of their level of understanding, and then what we'll do is ship some of this home so they can continue to build on their work. To finish, we have been asked by our government over the last few years to increasingly take what we've done in secondary back into primary school. So we do an awful lot of work in our primaries. We have 4 technology primary schools under construction. One will actually be handed over to us next Friday, where we've turned the curriculum on its head. We've changed the whole CPD level of expectation so that actually it's flipped, it's data rich, it's knowledge rich, it's a very engaging area. And during COVID, we developed this thing called EduSchool. So this is our online school that runs in parallel to the school system and actually continues to develop the skills, the knowledge, offers tutoring, takes our youngsters on virtual tours, so that actually, again, they can continue to learn. So we don't have any children left behind. So in conclusion, our CPD in my schools, in Shireland Collegiate Academy Trust, is all based on this concept of make it process driven, have a methodology that actually manages to do the heavy lifting for professionals, use technology to take away all those burdens of assessment, but also use technology to get into as many homes as possible, and as community centres and faith centres and wherever businesses, so that actually I can make my school as safe as possible, but as open as possible to working with as many children as we possibly can. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Sir Mark. Wonderful information and observations there, which are certainly very relevant at this moment in time. So as we're transitioning, let me invite Dr. Molina to share his thoughts with us.
Hi everyone, and thanks Mark for a great presentation. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Ezekiel. Yes.
Right. So let me talk a little bit about the work that we are doing at the World Bank to try to help improvements in teacher professional development. Let me start with something that we often fail to recognize, that teaching is a performance profession, as Doug Lemov in his great book, Teach Like a Champion, reminds us. Teachers teach live in front of an audience of 30 to 50 students, and as I'm sure many of you can corroborate, sometimes it is a very skeptical audience. And so having a great lesson on Monday guarantees you nothing about Tuesday lesson. And if you're having a bad day on Wednesday, you ask a question and students don't want to answer or look at you funny, or they don't want to sit down when you ask them, you can't hit pause and ask another more experienced teacher about what to do. You are live. In some sense, it's the same as this presentation. If I say something that you think is totally wrong, then I can't hit pause and say like, oh, let me go back. And when people realize that in profession that acknowledge that they work like for example, the soccer, as I have in the slide, they do things over and over again and they practice. A soccer player would never dare to play a game without having watched its rival or without having practiced many of the things that they're going to do during the game. over and over again. Because when you perform complex tasks, you do practice. And it is very telling that usually when you ask rooms of educators, how often do you practice what you do in the classroom before you walk in the door and actually play the game? They probably would look at you funny, because that's not something that people are accustomed to do. And once you have that aha moment, you start to rethink everything education system does. So imagine this: how can you help teachers if we don't understand what they are doing in the classroom? How can we provide them with targeted feedback? How we can help them if we don't have a common vocabulary to talk about teaching? I think the recognition that we have at the World Bank is that we have been failing teachers by not providing them with the education and support they needed to succeed in the classroom. Teaching is one of the most complex tasks. Every year there is a call for new things that teachers should do in the classroom. 20th century skills, these social emotional skills, but usually all the requirements are not accompanied by the support that they needed. So the first thing that we thought was needed to change this reality is to measure what happens in the classroom, so teacher education and support can be customized to what teachers actually need. That's why we developed Teach. So Teach is a classroom observation tool to measure teaching practices. We have already used the Teach in over 30 countries. And why we are so excited about Teach is because it has 4 characteristics that makes it unique. First, it measures time on task, and more importantly, the quality of teaching practices. Second, it captures instructional practices that nurture cognitive and social emotional skills. Third, it was developed with low and middle income countries in mind and is adaptable. And finally, it is free and comes with a suite of resources that make training much easier. And it's already translated in over 10 languages. So what that Teach actually measure? As I said, has 2 components: one to measure time on task, and one to measure the quality of teaching practices. On the time on task, it is a series of snapshots used to record what the teacher is doing and how many the students are on task. And on the second part, on the quality of teaching practice, it has 3 main areas: classroom culture, instruction, and social emotional skills. These 3 areas point to 9 behaviors, 9 elements, and 28 behaviors. So the 9 elements are the ones that you are seeing there, and the 28 behaviors are in the manual. These behaviors are characterized by low, medium, or high, based on the evidence collected during the observation. And these behavioral scores are then translated into a 5-point scale that quantifies teaching practices. So I won't be able to go through everything in the tool, but let me just give you a quick idea of what we measure. So classroom culture measure whether the teachers create a culture that is conducive to learning by treating a student respectfully, responding to their needs, challenging gender stereotypes, setting clear expectations, and redirecting misbehavior, focusing on what the student should do rather than what they don't. And what I mean by that is that effective teachers don't say to the students, stop talking, but they say, eyes on me, let's complete this task. And they focus on what they have to do, not on what they shouldn't be doing. Second, instruction that measure the extent to which teachers instruct in a way that deepens the student understanding and encourage critical thinking and analysis. So as I won't have time to go through each of these elements, lesson facilitation, check for understanding, feedback, and critical thinking, let me zoom in one, check for understanding, so you get a better sense of how the tool works. So here, this is a page of the manual. As you can see, there you have 2 behaviors, and you have low and high, and you see what we mean by each of them. And check for understanding is one of the most important practices effective teachers do in the classroom. So we have all been in classroom as a student or as a teacher, where the teachers ask something like, is everyone following along? And everyone says yes, and they move on to the next task. Or alternatively, the teacher asks a question, only the students in the front row raise their hand, and one of them to answer the questions, and they move on. However, those that raise their hands are not a representative sample of students, but they are the ones that are more likely to actually know the answer. As a result, by asking students that raise their hand, the teacher may think students know, or everyone knows, but that's not the case. And we see that this is something that happens a lot when the alternative is to actually ask questions that prove whether students are understanding or are not. The same thing happens when you see the teacher sits at the desk grading homework while students are doing independent work, where we know from the literature that systematically monitoring by circulating the classroom and approaching a student or group of students to check their understanding is a much better practice. Or even after that, we can see it here, but the third behavior actually look at whether the teacher are adjusting instruction to the level of the students. We know that if teachers often have to move on fast to finish the curriculum on time and are not able to adjust to the level of the students, or alternatively, they go very slow and students simply have to wait for the next learning activity. Finally, the third area, social-emotional skills. Here we measure the extent to which the teacher instills autonomy by providing a student with choices on how to approach tasks, as well as allowing students to take meaningful roles in the classroom. It also measures whether the teacher promotes a student effort and helps a student understand that failure and frustration are part of the learning process. And finally, measure whether the teacher fosters social and collaborative classroom environment. And again, the idea is that each allows us to have a common language to talk about teaching practices. We transform the anecdotal examples into actionable data that could be used to improve. So let me go fast through, as I said before, Teachwatch was developed with low and middle income countries in mind. And this means three things. First, that we did a literature review of the evidence, and you can see the paper online on what are effective teaching practices. And we also tested those effective teaching practices in footage in 11 countries. And then we pilot with more, bigger samples in 3 of them. We made a lot of effort to make the tool easy to use, and it had frequently asked questions. We check with observers when they understand and we didn't understand, and then we change the tool, we refine it, and the tool is adaptable. That means that what has happened in several countries is that we have a modular approach. So if your CPD at this particular point is trying to improve social-emotional skills, then you can use those. Or if you're trying to improve instruction, you can use that part of the tool and tailor it to the exact needs that the government have. And one thing that we did, and which has got the validation study published, is we look at whether once we train observers to use the tool, do different observers observing the same classroom assign similar scores of different? Because if they assign different scores, then the tool is not actually useful. And what we found in many studies is that observers that are trained and certified on the tool are very good, are very reliable. So that it means that when they look at the same classroom, they get the same results. And as I said, we've developed a lot of resources to try to make it easier for people to adopt it. We have a training manual. We have an app to collect the data online. And we also have automatized programs that get all this data that is collected and produce reports that analyze the data, benchmark, and do many of the things for teachers to use. Finally, all the information about the tool is in the webpage, so you can go after we finish if you are interested. But what I want to move on in the presentation is, having a tool is important, but what is more important is moving from being able to observe what's happening in the classroom to help teachers improve the teaching practices. And we see that is usually a bottleneck, a constraint that we've seen. As I said, have applied the tool in 30 countries, we see that actually what we are getting is that their teaching practices are poor in many of the countries that that we have assessed. Teachers are actually not performing as well on traditional, on proven strategies like how to provide feedback, how to check for understanding, how to establish the lesson and a scaffold, and then the need on all these countries is okay. So I understand that practices are poor. How do I improve them? How do I help my teachers improve those practices? And that is something that we're currently working on. And I want to share some of the insights which I think would be useful as you also think about the CPD in your school. So first, as I said, we start with identifying the areas of strength and the areas of improvement. If you don't do that and you provide the same CPD for every teacher, then you already have a problem. Then you design your feedback, you design the CPD so that teachers want to adopt those behaviors in the practices. And that may seem simple, but it's very difficult. You don't have to assume that they had to change it, but that you need to do it in a way so they want to do it. And then, of course, provide ongoing support, because changing in behavior is not something easy. It takes time. And that means that you'll have to follow up on that. So let me tell you one of the biggest insights in psychology about how our brain works and what that has to do with change and what that has to do with your job. So, and this is a great metaphor that is in the book, The Happiness Hypothesis. So our brain works as if we have a rider on top of an elephant. So when yesterday night you put your alarm clock at 7 a.m. to do some exercise today, your rider was in control of your action. Today, when you woke up and you touched the snooze button to sleep in a little bit more, the elephant took over. So the rider is a part of your brain that loves to plan and analyze, sometimes so much that overthinks things. The elephant is a part of your brain that is driven by short-term rewards, like sleeping in. So when the elephant wants something, the rider is overpowered. And understanding this is very important because this would allow you to think about what are the principles that you have to take into account when designing your CPD program at your school. And in particular, I will talk about two principles. And how those relate to the job that you do. So the first principle is what look like resistance to change is often lack of clarity. So how often do we say that teachers are stuck in their old teaching method? We said that, some of these things that we said are proven teaching practices, we provided to them and they are not actually implemented in the classroom. Or the same thing, we say we know that practical training is good CPD, but we see a lot of lecture-based teacher training. And it's usually easier to think that people don't want to change than thinking that maybe the advice that we are providing is still too vague. So the key for this is that, as I said before, the writer overthinks things and get lost in ambiguity. So what it means to improve classroom management, what it means to foster critical thinking. If you observe the lesson and say the teacher need to connect the lesson to a student interest, what that means for the teacher. And I think that is something where we can improve substantially on the current way that most professional development is provided to teachers. Think about how many New Year resolutions fail because of this. People all the time say, I will eat healthier, but what does healthier really mean? If you are hungry and you want to eat some ice cream and you say last week I ate some salad, is that, healthy or not? Usually what people have done is they do something that is called BAW rules, black and white rules. So for example, you say, I will exercise every day for 1 hour. doing X activity. And that reduces the level of ambiguity and make it clear what you have to do. And studies have found that when people do that, it is much more likely that they will actually follow through. So to direct the rider, what you need to do is to script the critical moves. So for example, in our work, following up the work of the classroom observation tool, what we are doing is making, so for example, if the teacher has a problem establishing routine, here are the 4 steps that you need to follow. And as you see, those are scripted. We try to put a lot of details in terms of what you need to do. And that is because we've learned that that is the way to make it easier for teachers to actually adopt those changes. And let me go to the second principle that it says, because so far you can, with what we said in principle 1, okay, you have to avoid the ambiguity to direct the rider. But then you also have to motivate the elephant. So how to motivate the elephant? So the principle 2 says that what looks like laziness is often exhaustion of willpower. And let me tell you for a little bit, this study that is one of the most famous studies in psychology about human behavior. So imagine that you are part of a research study. You've been asked to skip a meal before coming to the lab. Imagine that there is a chair, a table, an oven, and a mirror, and there are 2 bowls in the table. One bowl with cookies, as you can see there, and one bowl with radishes. So you are part of this experiment. Participants come into the room, and to a group of participants, they said, oh, you can eat the cookies, but you can't eat the radishes. And to another group, they said, oh, you can eat the radishes, but not the cookies, while you wait for the experiment to unfold. Then, after 10 minutes, the researchers come and say, like, oh, here is an easy puzzle that you can solve. And of course, there is not such a thing as an easy puzzle in this case, and this puzzle is unsolvable. But what the researchers were able to assess is that the people that were allowed to eat the cookies, they spent an average of 19 minutes trying to solve the puzzle. On the other hand, the people weren't able to eat the cookies and had to exert their willpower not to eat the cookies were only able to use 8 minutes of trying to attempt to solve the puzzle when they gave up. So what the study showed is that those that exert willpower not to eat the cookies were able to do fewer attempts at the puzzle. So that proved that willpower is a scarce resource. That means that we cannot rely on willpower to overpower the elephant. The only way to, and that proves the only way to sustain change is to build habits and make good practice automatic, so they don't tax the willpower of the teacher. So going back to our example, what that means? So it means that to make it more likely for teachers to change, you need to make the changes small enough, not to be too demanding. So imagine, for example, that you are considering taking up tennis. No, because you like, oh, tennis, I need to do a sport like tennis could be. And imagine that you practice for a week with Roger Federer. You will give up because you won't be able to score a point. So the point is that when you make it too difficult, it's, that change is not going to happen. The same is for a teacher. If you observe a teacher and provide feedback on 8 things to improve, even if the teacher needs to improve those 8 things, the elephant within that teacher will decide not to do it. And the rider will come up with a rationale, oh, this won't work in my classroom, or, you don't know my students, whatever. So rather than focus on everything that did not work, what the principal needs to do, what the school leader needs to do, is point the one thing that teachers can work realistically to improve. This is what we call shrink the change, or make it easy. So even after you make it easy, you have to make it rewarding, no? Because remember, the elephant is not easily motivated. You need to make it rewarded in the short term. So what are the ways that you can make it rewarding for the teacher to have to adopt these new teaching practices? Well, that means that you should start with the practice that make the work of the teacher more enjoyable for the teacher. So, for example, if in the classroom there are no routines and there is chaotic, if you help the teacher to establish those routines and take control of the environment, that will definitely would be rewarding for the teacher, because now he will be able to actually teach. That is, no teacher goes into teaching to manage classrooms. Yet, if you are unable to manage a classroom, you won't be able to teach effectively. So finally, there are other things that you can do to make it rewarding. Actually having that relationship with the teacher, making sure for the teacher that he has something to support that wants him to improve, that can listen to them when they need, is definitely another way to reward them, as well as to by checking on these specific teaching practices and seeing whether they improve. They don't have to wait until the end of the semester to receive recognition for the work that they have been doing. But the last one is, on top of making it easy and rewarding, it's usually very useful to use intention triggers. So this means that after you provide feedback on how to check for understanding, you go to the next lesson and say, like, okay, let's work together on how you actually plan to use, when, and in which part of the lesson, which is your question that you will use, and actually doing this, that is called doing intention triggers, has been shown to make it much more likely that the teachers would actually adopt it. And following all these ideas is the way to create a habit, and those habits will then make it so that the teacher actually follows these new practices. So just to recap, teaching is a performance profession. Observation and feedback is critical for improvement. Teach provides a common language to talk about teaching and to measure teaching practice. There are other classroom observation tools. So, I'm just talking about Teach because we develop it, but you can see others. Number 3, to transform teaching and learning, we need to direct the rider and motivate the elephant. To direct the rider, we need to script the critical move and leave no ambiguity. And to motivate the elephant, we need to build habit to make good practice automatic. And at the end, I just left it for any one of you that wants to see how they can actually implement these ideas, is an exercise. So think about a good practice: a student washing their hand, parent read at home with their kids, teaching using new pedagogy, and work through the principles and see what that would entail, what that would make you do differently from what you do today if you were to adopt these principles. And my final bit is that there are some additional resources that we've developed at the bank if you're interested. So that there is a web page. The first is the WDR on education. It's a World Development Report. It's a flagship report on education that we launched in 2018. Then the second one is the approach paper on teachers that lays what is the evidence and 5 principles to improve teacher effectiveness. And the last one is a note that we recently developed on 3 principles to support teacher effectiveness during COVID. But let me stop here and listen to your questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Molina. That was a really, really inspiring presentation with a clear note of advocacy for teachers, their critical roles, and the supports that they so need, especially when so much is being asked of them at the same time, and for also taking us through the very important psychology of change and behavior and how that applies to professional development. So as we move into the discussion portion, I do want to first invite Dr. Jyoti Gupta. I want to acknowledge that she has been instrumental in planning this week, and so I do invite her. She's the director and principal of DPS Sahibabad, and I want to give her the floor to have the opportunity to ask her question before we open it up to everybody else. Dr. Jyoti Gupta, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bhandari, and what a wonderful session, Sir Mark and Dr. Molina. You've established the fact that the continuous professional development for the teachers is the need of the hour. And we've been recognizing this, that all of these children who are 21st century children, if we keep teaching them with the 20th century skills or the 19th century skills that we have grown up with, probably we will be doing a disservice to these children. And also, it is very important that we change. Change is the only constant, and this COVID times have taught us that we as teachers need to change very, very quickly if we want the children to be engaged into our classes. From being the sage on the stage to being a guide by the side, teachers are these days just mentoring the children, and they are guiding the children from the side. What I want to understand from you is that after establishing the need of the training for the teachers, and after the schools and the management and the principals, they train the teachers, how do we ensure, as people who are in the roles of the leaders or the principals or the managements, that the effect of the professional development is actually reaching the children, is actually reaching the classroom? How do we measure the impact, and how do we ensure that the training is not just left in the portals of the training but has reached the classroom?
Should I go ahead?
Yes, please, whichever one of you would like to go.
So I think this is an excellent question, because we at the World Bank have spent or have supported millions and billions of dollars trying to improve teacher professional development, and many times we don't have much to show for, because this professional development is people go to a conference room in a nice setup, they get some training, but usually the training is not very useful, very practical, and then that doesn't translate into what happens in the classroom. So that was part of the idea of developing a tool so actually school leaders could enter into the classroom. This is also something that different countries see this very differently, and it's also cultural barriers. In many countries, is what happens inside the classroom is as a teacher responsibility, and as a school leaders, we have nothing to do with that. And I think that with time, we are recognizing that it's important for school leaders to be part of what happens in the classroom, by not to make it the teacher, to try to make the teacher accountable, but to support the teacher to understand the problems that they have. So the idea of the classroom observation tool is to actually see what is happening in the classroom. So if the training, and then also this allows to tailor the training, because then the training can't be about anything. So what is the objective of the training? If whoever is developing the CPD cannot tell us what is the expected behavior that you expect the teacher to change after that training, then you already know that that training is not going to work. And many times the theory of change is not very clear. And I came to have a discussion on another country that they couldn't explicitly say what they expect to change after the CPD. If you can't tell me what you expect the teachers to do differently, then that's not a good CPD. That's just it. That may be theoretical, maybe have many things, but that's just not a good CPD. So, but if you can articulate what has to improve, and then you can measure it in the classroom in some way, and there is, things are not perfect. It's not that you will be measured perfectly exactly what the teacher will do, but you will be able to see, okay, some of the activities that you have in the CPD, now the teacher is doing it in the classroom. So you tell the teacher how to establish routines, you now see that the teacher are establishing routines in the classroom, and then you provide feedback on how to do it better, on how to do it consistently, on how to do it. And that is the way things move. No, it's not easy. Nothing will happen, in 1 or 2 days. But I feel like that is the way that you ensure that CPD is actually making progress. Let me stop there.
So Ezekiel's covered many of the things that I would have said. We actually use interestingly different language. I think the best school change that we've seen in England in the last few years is a return to focusing on the curriculum and a movement away from accepting that people are good if they've been on training. Because we had a terrible 10-year period where if our middle and senior leaders attended some training, there was a presumption that they must know what they were doing. But actually, the training wasn't in any way tied with children being better. It was tied with them being better. And whilst I think we had this sort of belief that osmotically, if the staff were trained better, the youngsters would do better, it's just a flawed argument. So what we've seen change dramatically in I suppose in the UK, specifically in England, is a return to focusing on the curriculum, because for a period of time we sort of parked it as though it was something that was going to take care of itself, which from our perspective, certainly from my trust perspective, is completely the wrong thing to do. Look after the curriculum and nurture it, so actually both staff and youngsters know why they're doing what they're doing and how they do it. But then absolutely focus on process development, because as Ezekiel said, if by virtue of doing some form of CPD at whatever level you can't see the process improving, then actually it's pointless. It's just cosmetic. It's just a vanity project. And actually in England for a period of time, we set up a series of leadership programs that were simply vanity projects. People who were good taught people to be good, but it was done in such a distant way, it made no difference to kids. And everything that we do is supposed to be about young people. So please don't follow what I saw in England. I'm sure Ezekiel see much better practice elsewhere, but we became obsessed with leadership programs for the sake of leadership programs, not CPD for the sake of youngsters.
Thank you
so much, Dr. Bhandari. The floor is yours.
Thank you for those responses. Now I want to move to taking a few questions we've been getting, and just to share with everyone the spread of attendees we have. We have from within India, we have teachers and leaders who've joined from Delhi, from Mumbai, from Kapurthala, from Himachal Pradesh, West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, Punjab, and we also have someone from Nigeria. So really participants from all over. I want to start with actually a very basic yet critical question that someone has asked, and we're not sure who's asked this question, but just a very basic question to sort of get your expertise, Dr. Molina and Sir Mark. And the question is, in your opinion, what is the difference between a good teacher and a great teacher? I think that sounds like a simple question, but it's an important one. And so if you could share your sort of top 2 or 3 observations on what makes a good teacher versus a great teacher.
Ezekiel, shall I start this time? Rajika, I think that's a really hard question, because in a country that's been dominated by an inspection framework, so we've had Ofsted in place for pretty much 2 decades now. We have graded teachers, so we've had a national set of expectations as to actually what makes you a good teacher, and good has become acceptable. Outstanding has been what you want to model to others, and those people who make greatest difference to youngsters. But what is very clear in our grading of teachers is, as it's gone through the last few years, great will get you to okay levels of achievement, but outstanding or great will get you to exceptional levels of performance. I think the problem that we've seen is that actually, if you don't scaffold process around the great or the outstanding, it becomes the worst of our experience of differentiating the performance of teachers has been when schools do a lesson observation twice a year, and somebody is an amazing performer, So twice a year, actually, their lessons just fly, they buzz, youngsters are on board, they make massive progress, they bring all sorts of things into the lesson, but you know very well that the following day, actually, it's not the same. So at the risk of actually appearing repetitive, if it isn't by virtue of a learning process and a well-honed curriculum and a series of structures, actually, you can't be a great teacher for me. So you can be a good teacher and be able to perform and do this fairly well. But to be a great teacher, you've actually got to be able to do this in a structural way, in a sustainable way, in a replicable way, in a way that you can model for others. So mine's probably a slightly different definition between good and great, but that's what I think great. Great staff, actually, there is an essence to them that you can share with others, and it's so clear that they understand the learning process that you actually can share it with others. Good teachers do a decent job.
Thanks. Just to add on what Mark said, which I agree. So first, the question is definitely not a basic one. It's a very, very difficult question. People have tried for years to try to see what are the key characteristics that that good or great teacher have, and like list it out. And time again, we know that years of experience doesn't matter. Education, level of education usually doesn't matter. And many of the things that we can observe doesn't really matter, because people that have the same level of experience or the same level of education perform very differently. And that is just because teaching is a very, it's sort of a performance, and you can either improve as you go along, or you can stagnate, or you can get worse. And even with the, and you keep getting experience, even though it's not a useful experience. So I think that the only way to see who are the better teachers is to focus on, well, first you need to say, like, what do you mean by a great teacher? What do you mean? And usually, although it is restrictive, the one way that we've seen that works is when you focus on learning. Which are the teachers that allow students to learn the most? And what do those teachers do? And it is difficult to know what they do, but usually as, and my second caveat would be that if we were able to get from the point of what we are now in India, as well as in many countries, to go from the pool of teachers that we have now to a pool of teachers that is good, that would change dramatically student outcomes as a whole. So sometimes, because we are trying to aim for like outstanding, we don't do the steps. And I think you can't get to outstanding until you get to good, and we are far away from good at this point. So I think doing those things that will get us to be good is what we should focus on, and then we can get to great. But one characteristic that I would say for the great teachers is that they are not only good for their own classroom, but they collaborate with teachers within the school to make everyone great, which I think is something that usually some teachers think that their job is just to focus on their students and improve that and improve what's happening in their classroom. But like, you have to think of us as schools or as networks, and how you improve the whole system and not just your particular classroom. But let me stop there.
Thank you for that. And actually, we just learned that question was from Ms. Rashmi Lata Sharan, who's the principal of Bhojia Vidyapeeth School in Himachal Pradesh in India. So the next question that I would like to share with you is, it comes from Nina, and we don't know her full, from Ms. Nina, we don't know her full affiliation, but she asks, and I think that this is particularly relevant right now with the COVID scenario, but she asks, how can we improve the effectiveness of teachers, particularly as it relates to having them teach online classes? So I guess sort of the bigger question here is, what shifts in the thinking around best practices and professional development for teachers, what shift, if anything, as teachers are having to more and more teach online. And so, Mark, of course, your school has been doing a lot of work around this, and with the focus on technology. So maybe if you would like to start and sort of share some thoughts on what needs to be the focus right now, particularly with teachers having to grapple more and more with online teaching.
So what have we seen that's different? So one of the things we've definitely seen is that, so we've used Microsoft Teams for over 5 years across our group of schools and in our sort of region. But when we offered training CPD sessions for other schools, quite often they still wanted to come. They wanted to come to our campus. They wanted us to go to a different venue. Obviously, what COVID has done has stopped that. So actually, COVID has meant that it's much more acceptable for people to use either Google Meet or Teams or whatever. We found Teams to be exceptionally useful. In terms of working with youngsters, we've seen some interesting things. So one of the things that we saw within the first couple of weeks was that actually quite often it was better to put 2 classes together and actually have two teachers work with more youngsters than actually have separate groups. And the reason, and it became really clear really quickly that sort of methodology was beneficial, was that the teachers talking to each other sparked off a better conversation and level of interactivity with youngsters than if it was one person. So we thought, well, we need to test this hypothesis. So we then tried it with different year groups in different phases, and actually found even our youngest youngsters in primary schools actually liked that dual delivery model. What we've absolutely found is that, so we run live events every day. It's our summer break at the moment. When I showed the slide of EduSchool, what I forgot to say was that actually that's an online school across this whole summer break. So we used it during the end of term, but we're doing it now. And every morning at about 11 o'clock, we run a live lesson. One of the days last week, we had 200 and something youngsters watch a live lesson. A day later, we had 40, 50, but lots of youngsters watched it in a recorded way. So I think we're seeing all sorts of things come from COVID. There's the how you craft a recorded lesson, how you deliver a live lesson, how you duly deliver lessons, how you actually make sure you explain the learning objectives in online delivery in a far clearer way than sometimes people presume they can do in a normal lesson, because it doesn't follow that same linear pathway, because obviously you can't see the youngsters all the time. So we're doing a lot of work at the moment. We're actually working with a company called Smart who make interactive technology. And actually, they're based in Canada. We're doing some leadership work with them. And one of the things we're doing is taking all the bits we've learned, Rika, over the last few years in terms of online delivery, but also what have we learned in the COVID time, where it actually feels a purer form, a more difficult form. And we're sort of putting some of those things together. But certainly that dynamic of dual delivered, that absolutely a change here in England of people are more than happy to have Teams training now. And actually then starting to use question bars. I think the other thing, perhaps to finish with, is we've also spent a lot of time collecting together resources to not only support children at home, but support their families to support their children at home, to make sure that actually youngsters don't feel isolated. Oh, and then last bit, what else have we done differently? We've run pastoral structures. So the first thing that we saw in some of the schools we supported is that it was very much about delivering lessons. And what we do is we deliver lessons, but we do the wraparound of well-being, and we try and then encourage them to do some physical activity. I saw in the question bar, how do you get youngsters to do physical activity? We've had them doing stuff in their lounge homes. We've had them going in the garden. We've had them recording things and uploading things in the garden. We've had them taking their pulses. We've tried to make it much more interactive. We've sent resources home where we've set up a competition for writing, for filming themselves, doing physical activities, but all of those involving families, and not just in both primary and secondary. Long answer, sorry. Obviously, it's an area we're very passionate about.
I mean, Mark did a great answer, so I don't know where I have much to add, but like I just feel like each country and even each region will have very different challenges to cope with this pandemic and how to improve professional development. As well as saying, like in many cases, we have teachers that didn't want to use technology in the past, and now they see that this is the only solution. But we also see that in many cases, there is no penetration, or there are problems to actually access technology. So what are we doing in those cases, whether radio, TV, how we can innovate and how we can help a student? That somebody was saying also in the chat, like the classroom environment is very different. At home, they may not have an environment. How we can help them, as Mark was saying, how we can help the parents, the caregivers, to support students at home. I think that's definitely something that we need to improve as we move forward, and especially as COVID seems to be extending over time, and parents will need to step up to take care of this.
Thank you. Actually, the next question is from me. I want to ask this question because I was very struck, Sir Mark, by how extensively you all within the academy are using data. And you talked at length about the importance of data in informing what you're doing around professional development. And Dr. Molina, you sort of expressed a similar idea in a different way, which was saying designing feedback that's motivating. So my question is, how do you leverage? I mean, clearly data plays a big role in that feedback mechanism and in the process of improvement. But how do you bring about that mindset shift where teachers don't view data as punitive, but rather view it as a tool for improvement, where it's seen as something positive and evidence to be able to improve? And so if you could share some thoughts on that, on what are some suggestions for having teachers and educators embrace the role, the very critical role that data and feedback can play in the improvement process.
Ezekiel, do you want to start?
I'm happy. I'm happy to go first. I think this is crucial, and this is very, very difficult because in many cases we are working with countries that used to have principal or inspectors always as an accountability figure, and now we're trying to reform and say like, oh no, these guys now are going to provide you support. So if you're a teacher, of course you're not going to be saying like, oh yeah, come and provide support. So I think the only way to make this happen is to show with actions. I don't think that of course there is a lot of branding, there is a lot of communication that needs to happen. The communication needs not only go to the teachers, but to the people that used to be the accountability figure, because it wasn't their fault either. They were given a terms of reference that was, you have to do this, and now we're saying, okay, you have to be supportive. But usually, are we given the tools for them to be supported? Because they won't be able to be supported if they don't know what to do. I remember being in Pakistan in one classroom where in the middle of the classroom, we arrived with the inspectors from this particular city, and the inspector just told to the teacher in plain words that she was stupid and she was doing everything wrong. Where are the other books? Because the kids don't have enough books, and she doesn't know how to deliver the lesson in front of me and in front of every student. Like, if you are that teacher, how do you think that person is supporting you? It's definitely not. So there needs to be a training for people to be able to. It's not just giving them ways to capture data, but is, training them in ways to be respectful with the teachers, to understand the role of teachers, and to be supportive to teachers. It's not rocket science, but if you don't do it, they won't do it either. And I think especially in hierarchical societies, some people think that they are just there to tell others what to do. And in providing feedback, you are directing, you are influencing the teacher, but you also want to get the buy-in. If you don't have the buy-in, if somebody is afraid of you, or thinks that you are mistreating them, it's not very likely to adopt whatever you are saying that they should do once you go away. And for this to work, it needs to work when the principals or the inspector are not in the classroom. So I think it's just, but it can work. In Kenya, they use a program to Some that went from people being inspectors to being supportive. And in a matter of a couple of years, it worked substantially. Teachers you now talk to teachers and they love these curriculum support officers. So it can be done, but there is work to be done to get to that place. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Sergio. Rajika, I think so. I think one of the problems with assessment that we've seen in the UK, is that sometimes we've created such a difficult and such a complicated system that it's impenetrable for staff. So it's so difficult to do that they only do the easy things. And there's some great CPD, there's some great resources out there around assessment, and how, if you're not careful, you create a school system within a school or a national system whereby you only really assess what's easy, because there's either too many things, or they're too vague, or you create a system where all the things where I'd feel vulnerable, if I assess them, I won't share them with you in case you don't think I'm very good. And in the end, that's not what you want. So I think there is an attitudinal thing here, as Ezekiel is very clearly saying, I think, which is, if you have a mentality where you help others, you're doing the heavy lifting for others, then you can have an openness with assessment. If you have a hierarchical system and a judgmental system where actually I could lose my job, my school could be poorly graded, then there is no motivation to sharing the assessment data with you. The problem is, not only will they not share them with you as an external observer, but they probably won't share it with each other and with the children. So from my perspective, when we go into a school, because one of the things that happens in England is, if there's a failing school, trusts like mine are asked to go and take that school into the trust. The first thing that we do is resolve the assessment structure and simplify it, and take in a process that you can share with children, and you can share with families and with colleagues and with leaders, with leadership. And we have a very simple primary assessment structure based on the key essential skills for primary that then links to our national curriculum. I have a similar thing in secondary. And then the game changer for us has definitely been technology. And Rajiki, as you said, that's something that East Ireland is known actually throughout the world for the work that we've done. And the reason it's become a game changer is, when there's a lot of data, it's impossible for a person to manage it and still have a life if they're going to be that great teacher I want. But actually, technology can do that. That's where technology should be making the difference to our school system. It should take those things away that drag me away from being a great teacher or a great leader, because actually it's so burdensome, and just surface that data for me. So I think there's a mentality thing in terms of, are you a helper or are you actually a judge? There's a clarification of assessment, but then there is definitely today, with the technologies that are available across the world, not just in privileged areas, a lot of this actually is not particularly costly. The costly part now is the thought of how you construct the system. So actually, I do think technology will be a greater level than some school systems and state systems realize. People are going to catch them up, but it is that equity, it's that mentality, but it's also the sort of clarity of how you do it.
Great. Thank you so much for that. So I know we're nearing the end, And what I want to do very quickly is actually not pose any further questions to both of you, but just read out two quick comments and observations, because I know we don't have time to address everything. So this is from Ms. Monica, who's the principal of the Everest Public Senior Secondary School in Ludhiana, Punjab. And she says, as schools and educational institutions are closed, but other offices are open, we are facing issues with students both of whose parents are working. And in some cases, siblings are also not being able to attend online classes simultaneously. We try our best to plan the timetable for the offline and online classes. And certainly this is a challenging situation that they're coping with. I also want to share feedback from Mr. P.N. Ashok, who's the Senior Principal VPS, Krishnagiri, Tamil Nadu. And he says, Dr. Ezekiel Molina has rightly pointed out that we should carefully step into the mode of change and ensure that the professional development is pragmatic in every way. Learning outcomes need constant monitoring and measuring that will help the educational leaders to review their system of curriculum transaction. Thanks for enlightening us. So with that, Sir Mark and Dr. Molina, I want to thank you, but I actually want to now turn it over to Mrs. Neeti Shankar Sharma, who's head of the CBSE Center of Excellence in Panchkula, and she would like to offer a formal vote of thanks and close out the session.
Thank you, Rajat, ma'am. Thank you very much. And good evening to everyone, and good morning to the ones who are having morning today. Today was the third workshop under the series Virtual Professional Development Sessions for CBSE school leaders and teachers. And we had two wonderful speakers, Sir Mark and Dr. Molina. Sir Mark has rightly pointed out that technology works for us and we should not be dictated by technology. So that was a really, really important thing in today's scenario if we look at it. And there were a lot of takeaways of the session which we could look into, like the balancing of the academic and the 21st century skills in today's times, the delivery of curriculum where the idea of Launchpad was amazing, because this is something which I think which really take us away from a lot of things, in the sense that we take how we render the curriculum in today's times when we are doing online, when we have internet facilities and things like that. So that sort of a thing is very, very apt to, like, we move away from just the textbooks where we have maps or we have certain maps or modules around us, and then go to the internet, go to the wider perspective and scenarios. The concept of immersive room with an 180-degree view and online school was really, really an innovative thing that we came across. Then we had Dr. Molina, who highlighted the teaching as a performance profession. Very, very interesting, term to this entire scene. And he has beautifully elaborated on the concept that teach measures teaching quality and quantity both. So the classroom culture, the instruction, the socio-emotional, all these things play a very, very important and relevant part. Apart from this, the assessment techniques and its approaches and the importance of data, all these were discussed in length, I think, which is very integral to professional development of educators, especially in the current changing scenario. So, I'll just take this opportunity once again to thank the chairman, CBSE, Shri Manoj Ahuja, and our director, Skill Education and Training, Dr. Vishwi Saha, for Transformational Training Week, so I should say, and of course the partners who are there with us during the entire week. A special thanks again to speakers, panelists, and moderators who have been excellent throughout these days and making the sessions so enriching and meaningful for all of us here. Finally, one small, not to forget the participants. And I think Ma'am Bhandari ma'am would agree with that they have been a part of these series and have made it an interactive series, a must for such workshops. So looking forward to the forthcoming sessions. Thank you so much. Thank you. It was a pleasure being here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Helena.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you.
Bye. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
ma'am. Thank you, sir.